Welcome everyone to episode 86 of Raw Sport. My name is Ahmed Al Houli, and we are joined today, myself and Rick, with boxing royalty in the house, Mr. Don Majeski. Welcome to the show, my man. How's things?
Th- Thank you very much to be here with you for the first time. My great friend Rick Glazer as well. Thank you.
Rick, how are you feeling today, mate?
Great. Just looking to have a nice 45-minute run with the legend that Don Majeski is, and glad he could make it this evening. Tomorrow he leaves to fly to Japan for the big show on Monday was Tokyo, Don?
Yeah, Tokyo Dome. We've got Andrew Maloney coming back to fight one of the top Japanese prospects. He's 5-0, and there are two world bantamweight titles on the same card. So it's an opportunity for Jason Maloney, I should say, not Andrew. They're twins, so I can get them mixed up.
Yeah,
But
everyone does.
yeah, he's taking his shot there, and then we'll see. That's the land of the bantamweights, and the wealth in those divisions are all in Japan. So if you're going to showcase yourself, that's the place to be.
Don, you've been in this sport for over 50 years. We're seeing a transition in the sport like we haven't seen before that I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on the state of the sport right now?
Well, as at any time in boxing, it's very good for the ones who are doing well and very bad for the ones who are not doing very well. That having been said, I think there's a greater percentage of people not doing well today than I've ever noticed in the time I've been, and that's 55 years around boxing. I mean, when I started in the 60s, very few people were making a living. After the television revolution of the late 40s and 50s knocked out a lot of the smaller clubs, and then the casinos came in and knocked out the bigger clubs, people struggled. But there was a revival, mid-60s, early 70s. Television came back. The big arenas like Madison Square Garden, the Forum in LA, when I started out, had just opened new facilities in the Garden and a new building in California. So there were people going actually to the arenas to see fights. TV came on with the combination of casinos, and that cut down the big cities. But we blossomed and we flourished for a long time. But right now in the United States, in particularly, where I can relate the most, it's a very, very different business. And unless you're at the top, I would say, Rick, and you can tell me I'm right or wrong, 1/100%, you are in a terrible position, and it's really bad, and it's really hard for young fighters to come and turn pro and try to make a living. And that goes more so for those who are peripheral to those fighters, the trainers, the managers, the matchmakers, the agents, the promoters who try to make a living from them. There's just very little left.
So we're seeing a dwindling of revenue pretty much going. Not much is going down. It's all staying up the top.
Yeah, it does. And that old, what do they call, dribble down effect, trickle down effect. It's just not happening. We talk about this wonderful stuff happening in Riyadh and Saudi Arabia. Wonderful, fantastic that this man is financing these shows. It's Turk Ali Sheikh. He's a godsend. But no one is doing that for boxers in New York and Los Angeles and Philadelphia. There are occasional big shows, and the alternative is very small shows that are subsidized, where the promoter makes the manager virtually pay for the fights, or the fighter sell enough tickets to pay for his match. And that is almost impossible for a young boy starting out, or a young woman at this time, who doesn't have a connection to sell tickets. If they're generally poor, coming from a poor area, they're not going to be able to sell $20,000-$30,000 worth of tickets to subsidize a bout, or even $5,000 to subsidize a 4-rounder. So it's a real difficult situation we're in. I'm talking so much, but I'll give you one example. Tomorrow night, there's a show in New York at a place called Sony Hall. It seats about 1,000 people, and there are only 3 fights on the card. And yet they're charging $200 ringside. Most of the 2 or 3 fights, almost everybody's bought enough tickets almost to cover their show. And the main event, from what I'm told, the manager of one of the fights basically paying for 80% of the bout. So that's not a way for a healthy industry to survive.
What's the solution, and how did we get here?
Well, you can ask Rick, I guess. I'll give you my opinion. He can give you his.
Rick will tune in as well.
All right.
You. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I find this in every other sport, and I'm sure it's true in Australia. And remember, I come from the era I first came to Australia to see Barry Michael and Lester Ellis fight in Melbourne. And then I went with Bill Morty, who had Jeff Fennick, and we were there with Jeff Fennick without,
Was that
any
was that AD was that AD or BC?
BC, and I started in the BC and transitioned over to the AD. Yes. And but we he was drawing 18,000 people with fights like Marco Villasana and Mario Martinez and Daniel Zaragoza and Stevie McCrory. Fantastic. And then we brought in Jeff Harding on the heels of Jeff Fennick, and Bill brought in Joe Bugner, came from England. We had a healthy crop of fighters. Kostya Tszyu fought there. You hardly have ever seen anything like that, even today in Australia. But what we're missing in boxing, with every other major sport, whether it's soccer or football or rugby or baseball, basketball, hockey, has in it that we do not have in it in boxing, with probably the exception of Turkey Ali Sheikh, is the billionaire investor. The investor who can say, I'm not in this for the short run. I'm in it for the long run. Every promoter who promotes boxing today has to make a living from the shows he promotes. So he basically, if he doesn't make a living with every show, he's got to make a profit from enough shows to cover any of his losses, because he's making his living. Almost everyone, and Rick can correct me if I'm wrong, who runs another professional sport has come in with money to invest from outside. And if the sport, they can lose money, but they're going to still be billionaires once it's gone. And they can then afford to say, I'm signing these players for this team, and I may need 4 or 5 years to get the return back on my investment, but I'm willing to do it because the team will be here. And you don't have boxing pros with that kind of clout or money who say, I've got a building, like the owners of Madison Square Garden in New York, which was synonymous with boxing for 100 years, say, we want to be in the boxing business. We need events to fill our arena. We're willing to invest over 5 years, $40 or $50 million, which is nothing compared to what they pay one salary to a ball player. I think we signed one baseball player here, the Mets, Rick will correct me, gets about $60 million a year. One of 25 players that they invested. You could do that and invest in boxing for 5 years and develop 20 good fighters from the area. We've lost that. We've lost the parochialism of local fighters. We've lost good fights for entertainment value fighting, just so much. But what we really need are big investors who own arenas to put money up for boxing, sustain losses till they can reestablish the sport. And I think they can work that way. But that's a big ask.
My pushback on that is, why are we not getting that? Every man, once you put him in front of a boxing fight, he starts itching.
Because
Every woman wants to be at a fight ringside. Why?
Those billionaires, and Don and I have discussed this, those billionaires look at boxing as the red light district as professional sports, and they look at the Bob Arums and the Don Kings like gangsters. They don't look at them as businessmen, and that's part of the problem, I believe.
Those guys are gone. Don King's gone. Bob Arums is just the face.
The aura is there.
But
it doesn't matter. The
aura
but
here's
is
the
there.
thing. That boxing had that aura about gamblers and thugs in the 1880s. Yeah. Nice. All through the 1930s in New York and America, we talk about the Frankie Carbone, Blicky Palamos. But all through that period of time, we sustained boxing in the major arenas. So the people who own these arenas at that time said, we understand what boxing, but so what? We're going to do it anyway. Now something.
Those times have changed. Those times have changed.
Don, does it have anything to do? Does it have anything to do with the infrastructure of the sport? The major leagues
Absolutely.
That we see, that you've just mentioned, they have organized corporate hierarchies that can balance and check one another all the way through. We have 6 different promoters, big time, that control the sport. We've got 4 or 5 different sanctioning bodies, and we're just so disjointed. If it wasn't for a man who's worth billions of dollars to come and get them all on one card, that would have never, ever happened. That's what we're seeing this week, literally. So we are to blame.
Yeah.
Unless that.
Well, that's it.
Go on, sorry.
No, you get it. I'm saying this is a business. The only way fighters can make money is if somebody loses money. They're putting on these great fights not for profit. You see what I'm saying? But there's no end game. I say you need the money, the will, and the direction. I think it's wonderful there. But the only reason they're fighting is because they're getting more than the market value. And Ahmed, how can you run a business where, well, we can only have employees if we pay them 10 times what they're worth? That's not sustainable. It's sustainable if it's a means to an end, but it can't sustain. That's crazy. These guys are not fighting because they want more money that's in the market. Well, they'll have to just accept what's there, fight more often. It is tough. I think that promotional rights ultimately destroyed boxing. This was never meant to be a team sport. It was the managers fought for whatever promoter they wanted. The price was right, you fight. Now, and Rick will tell you, you can't make the best fights. If I want to make a match with 2 rated contenders, one might be with Eddie Hearn, one might be with Bob Arum. They're not going to let those guys fight for me. Whereas 50 years ago, manager, anyone.
Tell them the story. What just happened? We tried to make Mario Barros with David Papeau in France. Tell them that story, right? Tell right now.
PBC controls a lot of fighters. They sign content is what they want. One guy likened it to, I said, why do you sign all these fighters? They never fight. And he said, inventory. So they look at it like they have a hardware store and they need a nail and they need screws and they need hammers and saws and just hold it there till somebody wants it. And they put them on the shelf, literally. So they've got a fighter who doesn't draw money, who's a champion, one of 68 or 78 now. He's not an attraction. He's sitting there idle. And through Rick, I offered the guy $1 million to fight in France, which was a fight against a Papeau that I don't think one person in 20 million people in the world know who he is, or 100 million people in the world. An easy fight on paper for $1 million, which is way above his market value. And they turned it down. Now you have the right to turn down any fight you want. But it's easy for a promoter to say won't take. When a fighter gets a one-in-a-lifetime shot, he may sit around for another 6 months before he gets any kind of a fight. But that's how difficult. Years ago, I'd be able to make that fight. When we built Jeff Fennick, I brought in every contender from the world. World champions came to Australia. We met their price and they fought. Today, that's almost an impossibility to do that.
Okay, so what's our resolution? How do we fix this? We got 120 years of boxing history in front of us. Mm-hmm. Give us a solution. Rick, you too.
Well,
Don, go first, Don. I'm a regular on this show. You're the guest tonight.
When Australia was booming, you had a company called Stadiums Limited, and they ran arenas in Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney, Old Sydney Stadium. Now, there was a Harry Miller was the name of the matchmaker there, and the Wren family, I think, owned them. This is a little bit before my time, but they were still in operation. I mean, they ran shows.
Don, wait. Something was before your time?
Nothing's before my time. Yes, it was right before the cable.
That's right.
Yeah. So they were running basically every week. Guys would win. Guys would lose. It didn't matter. They would never fight for a world championship, but a guy like a Vic Patrick or Jack Carroll would be extremely successful. They would make huge figures comparable to the world champion today because they would draw 15,000 people in those days. I mean, the money was relative to the times. But they fought for a living. And now everybody picks and chooses. I believe that if the people now, you've got the tennis center in Melbourne and you've got the other arena in Sydney, if it's the one that we used to run with Jeff Fennick, if the owners, and now they're privately owned or municipal buildings, but the owners of those facilities said, we will go into the boxing business. We will invest 300,000, it could be obviously Australian dollars, a show for 10 shows, that's 3 million a year, to develop fights and tell the fighters, you're going to fight for us. If you come in and fight and lose, don't worry about it. We don't have to clear it with anyone. You're going to come back 3 months later and fight again. We control the market. We'll bring you back. A lot of fighters don't want to take a risk. They said, if I lose, I won't fight again for a year. But if you're controlling the market and running enough shows, you can bring fighters back. No other sport. If a rugby player doesn't score a point, they don't say you're off the field for the next 10 games. You didn't score. You come right back the next week and score. So the continuity has to be there, but the investment to pay the fighter enough that he's willing to take a risk and know that if he loses, his career isn't finished. That's what I think. We need major investors who own arenas to come in and sponsor boxing and to run boxing for their own sake, for their own, it's to their own benefit. Because years ago, an arena director at the Joe Louis Arena, name was Link Cavallari, went on when they built that arena. I worked with Tommy Hearns, and he used to fight in the old Olympia. And they built this new place called Joe Louis for the hockey team, the basketball team. And we took a tour with the hard hats on, and we went to the top, and he pointed down. They were just putting it down, seated about 18,000. He said, Don, my job is to fill this arena 365 days a year. I know it's impossible. That's the job of every arena owner and director. He says, if I have to put in a hockey game, basketball game, the circus, boxing, wrestling, whatever it is, I've got to fill those dates. Well, I'll bet you most arenas have 10 empty dates a year. There's 10 dates they could use for boxing and revive not only a sport, but more importantly for them, a business. It would be a source of revenue if it's handled right. And I can't see, if you do it consistently and invest enough money with the right kinds of fights. And again, we're in the entertainment business. We have to give you entertaining fights. I cannot imagine it not succeeding.
Rick?
I echo Don's same thoughts, but I also believe that we have to get back to grassroots promoting. And I think that people fail to do grassroots promoting. They go to a casino, it's like pitching a tent. They just go to a casino, they don't bother promoting the show. The casino does what they can do, and whoever shows up, shows up. They're not out hustling tickets, they're not putting up posters. I haven't seen a fight poster hung up on a street corner in 20 years. And we've gotten away from that, and we've gotten away from core boxing and everything. But what people don't get is boxing is like politics. Everything is grassroots, and we've gotten away from that. Everybody thinks that boxing is Las Vegas and New York and stuff like that, and HBO. It was HBO and this pay-per-view and all this kind of stuff. It's not. It starts at on the ground level, and we don't have those ground level shows anymore. For multiple reasons, because fighters won't fight each other, and the opponents price themselves out, and they only want to go on TV shows where they can get $1,000 a round for a 4 or 6 rounder, when you can't make that on a club show. And then the commissions, if you go to a less of a fighter, they'll fight for $3,000. The commission won't approve it because they say he's got too many losses in a row. He's a bum. They don't want him in that state. It's a cynical thing here, and it needs improvement in every area. It needs some improvement in every area to bring boxing back to where it was in America 30 years ago.
And Australia is the same thing. Believe me, I was there from all the glory days of Australia in the more recent times with Fenwick and with Zoo and with Harding and, with the Waters brothers. And I saw how it's gone. I've seen how it is devolved. Once in a while I have a mega show at Cambosis, and that's once every year or something, but you can't run a business with one mega show a year.
Don's been in boxing so long, 56 years now. Okay. Ahmad, that a lot of these reporters and podcasters, they call them up, and the only thing they ask Don about is fighters to interview him about fighters that are dead. When I brought him on the show tonight, I told him about it. He says, "What dead fighter do you want me to talk about?"
Yeah.
And I says, "We're only going to talk about a sport that's died, not dead fighters."
Don, I'm going to take you back a step. The New South Wales government, which is Sydney, Australia, pretty much recently had a lot of backlash. You want to know why?
Yes,
because they backed the UFC recently in Sydney, which brings tens of millions of dollars in state revenue, economic boost, so on and so on. Chris Minns is the Premier of New South Wales.
Okay.
He was sitting on a podcast with Dana White.
Oh, okay.
Right? Yeah. The UFC has done this, and I firmly believe this is one of the reasons why we are not what we are. And there's one man who's doing something similar. The UFC in Australia, there's a few fight promotions who they sign deals with, the local fights, they put them up on the UFC Fight Pass, they push them, they go and recruit their fighters from there. So they're actively doing that.
Right.
And they're doing that around the world. And they're opening up these PIs, performance institutes around the world, where they're bringing in these talents and all the growth areas. They got one in Mexico, they got one in China, they got one in multiple other, they're opening one in Africa. They're spending the money to build that grassroots infrastructure and giving people the facilities they need. Now, let's go to boxing. In boxing, the lower tier, the only notable presence is Pro Box TV. Is Gary Jonas. Gary Jonas is and I know this personally. Like, I know he's putting millions of dollars a year on this sport for not much. If you look at the ROI, he's doing what you said others are not doing, right?
Right.
He's spending money and not expecting profit today. But he's built this company around those low-level fighters, those 50-50 fights. And now, before it was all in Plant City, now they're moving around the country and they're getting involved.
Yeah, they have a show
Well,
right now as we're talking in California at the Chicken Ranch Casino in
There's
Jamestown,
a fight.
California, as we
Exactly.
speak right now.
Exactly. So he's one guy who's doing this. And the amount of backlash he's copped from people within the industry is stupid, because he's saying to people, we want 50-50 fights. And we want the fights that people want to watch. And we don't care if you got 3 losses, 4 losses. We just want action-packed fights.
Yeah.
Right? No one else is doing this. So what's happening is these guys up the top, the big promoters and that, they look down upon that. But really, that's what builds our sport. So
Grassroots boxing. That's
other than
grassroots.
Other than him, there's nobody doing that. So that's what I believe we need more of in Australia.
Well, that's another thing.
Keep going.
Here's what's look. The television in the U.S. I'm losing the audio here, but
that's all right.
We no longer have. Okay, so I got, when Fennec fought, we had CBS come out and televise his fights. CBS from the United States. Now the show wasn't dependent. Now what happened also is, what Rick brought up, the promoters, I call them RFB promoters. They pick up a phone and say, got a TV date, give me $100,000. They call the casino and say, give me 50 room nights and 50,000, and that's a show. You could have the incongruity of somebody from Australia fighting a guy from Mexico in Tupelo, Mississippi, or a Las Vegas fight with a guy from Newark, New Jersey, fighting a guy from San Francisco. There's no local interest. They're just filling a date the fastest and quickest way they can. But the point is, we had CBS come out and buy a Fennec fight. CBS would go to Thailand and buy a flyweight championship. This is American television. But they would give, or England, they would give any promoter in the world a chance. Now, they had their own local TV as well, but American television was open to anybody. I have a better deal. Rick has a better deal. You had a better deal. Now they have what they call like an output deal. So we no longer have CBS or NBC, who also did that, or ABC or ESPN. Now these television companies, at least in the States and the zone to a degree, tie up exclusively with one promoter, rather than say, we're open. Anybody gives us the best fight. Ahmed, you give me that fight for 100,000. I got Rick, give me a better fight for 80,000. Don's give me one for 60. Everybody's competing, and the beneficiary are the fighters and the people who turn on television see the best fight. And
the beneficiary was the TV networks, because you got the fights for the cheapest amount. They got the best fights for the cheapest amount.
Everybody's competing against one another. Now, of course, some people say you're not going to get a championship for the same price you pay for a 10-rounder, and they kick in the extra money. There was plenty of money for everyone, and again, it was spread around. Yes, Don King and get more dates only because they had more fighters and more shows, but that didn't preclude somebody from a small city or Bill Morty getting a date with Jeff Fennick without having to partner up with a promoter and sell half his fighter. So the Gary Jonas method is terrific, but that used to be, with the TV network directly, and they would give it to everybody to get a chance. So that is one of the best things that can happen. Yeah, it's just not enough of it. Even in Australia, they tell me that it's basically a closed shop, the television. Only one promoter has a contract with the TV outlet. That is not helping boxing. Let him take 50% of the dates, but they need to spread it around, give everybody a chance to compete, give fighters from the West Coast of Australia a chance to get exposure, along with the guys from the North and the South, from Brisbane to Perth, or, Sydney to Tweed Heads or whatever. That's what you have when you have a healthy situation.
Let's talk about Australian boxing. You've been a man who's been involved in Australian boxing for many, many years, from the years of Bill Morty, the boxing legend, Jeff Fennick, who we've also had on the show. Right now we have Fox, who is putting up money. We have Stan, who has the sporadical show here and there. Stan is Channel 9. And then last year we had Channel 7. Channel 7. a big network, which was Angelo Di Carlo's Premier Boxing Series, which is
Okay.
no longer doing anything. Now this year has been a change.
Okay.
No Limit, which is the Rose brothers,
Oh.
Rick's friends,
Mhm.
and Angelo Di Carlo are working together, and
Okay.
Angelo's taken a few dates off the Rose brothers,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's because there's 400 or 500 active professional fighters in Australia, so there's not
Mhm.
much of a market, right? So
Mhm.
imagine for so many years this market was segmented. That small of a market, it's this small, then it's broken down into bits, more and more bits, right? Where's the
Mhm.
investment going to come from, right?
Mhm.
And my opinion, the only reason why these dates have opened up is because the Tim Zoo trains died down, and
Right.
nobody's been able to fill that gap after him. Now
Mhm.
that's a controversial opinion back home, but it is what it is. If you look
Mhm.
at what's happened before that, you couldn't talk to No Limit. You couldn't they weren't interested.
Yeah.
On this podcast, Angelo Di Carlo came on about a year and a half ago. Episode that got over 60,000 views on Facebook alone. He went to
Wow.
town on Fox. He went to town on No Limit, on everyone,
Mhm.
because they played a monopoly in a market
Mhm.
that's minute. They made it even smaller,
Mhm.
segmented and more fragmented than ever.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing back home now is that transition
Mhm.
back to people working together because they're
Mhm.
forced to work
Mhm.
together. On the
Mhm.
global level, we're seeing people working back together because they're
Mhm.
forced to work back together because the sports hit rock bottom.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
going back to Australia, at the
Mhm.
end of the year, Foxtel rights with No Limit, I believe, finish. So renegotiations of signing the next set of rights
Mhm.
probably starts at the end of the year or probably beforehand, obviously.
Right.
So what we're seeing now is that people have realised the gravy train's finished.
Mhm.
That's stopped. That's done. Now we have to work with each other
Mhm.
in order to move to the next step. But
Mhm.
my question is, right? In the days of Bill Morty, when he
Mhm.
did what he did, right?
Mhm.
What was the secret that he brought to the table? He, from my understanding, I don't know if you know the name. He's a guy named Ray Giles. He
Rachel.
Ray Giles. He's an old boxing coach in Australia. He said to me, he's probably about 70, 80 years old now. He said to
Okay.
me, Morty went around Australia to all the clubs and did a massive deal, the pubs,
Oh
right?
yeah. Right.
And he
Correct.
put the fights in thousands of pubs where thousands congregate and drink and have fun and enjoy themselves. At the
Mhm.
time, that was revolutionary, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
these things, what did Morty do to bring the sport, elevate the sport to the level he did? That
Mhm.
today we don't see.
Well, look, with fighters, it's they always say that a fighter's born or they made, and it's a combination of both. But promoters are the same thing. Trainers, anybody with a great talent, whether was a Picasso said that art is a collaboration between God and man, and the less man does, the better. And promoters are like, you're born promoter. You think like a promoter. And a promoter's not a guy just makes a fight and puts two fellas in the ring and then sells tickets. He comes up with innovative ideas. And like Bill, starting the pay-per-view situation. But he also had a great attraction. Tex Rickett was as great as he was, but he started with Jack, he started his career early, but Jack Dempsey launched him. And Joe Louis was it, Mike Jacobs. And Jim Norris had Rocky Marciano and Sugar Ray Robinson. And Bill Morty had a fighter, Jeff Fennick, who was the greatest fighter of his generation, and there with Les Darcy and young Griffo, the greatest fighters ever to come out of Australia. So he had a phenomenon that went on to win 3 titles, exciting. And he built also from that, but he also didn't stop promoting just because of Jeff Fennick. So he was a brilliant promoter, a great guy, wonderful personality, great flair, had a wonderful relationship with the press and the media. He was a gambler. He was a gambler both out of boxing and in boxing, but he would take a risk. When I would say, Bill, we need to pay this fighter $50,000 to fight Jeff Fennick, which is like $500,000 today. And and we was a bantamweight, Superman. I said we got to do it, and Bill, no question, wrote out the check. Let's do it. He may not have had the money in the bank at the time, but he made sure he found it. So he took risks and he had a vision. And we built fighters, or he built, he promoted. He was really a great salesman. He had a great flair for it, and he had a great talent, Jeff. But look, he revived Joe Bugner to the point, and nobody wanted him. He comes to Australia. We gave him 3 fights. He fought Mike Weaver here and Quick Tillis, and we got him a fight in England, or Bill did, I should say, with Frank Bruno, that launched Barry Hearn's career. So he could bring back the career of an older fighter, and he could start the career of a young fighter. He just had a great flair, like as a Bob Arum or Don King, or any of the great promoters of all time, George Parnassus. They had something in them that they knew how to. It's like, why is that fighter so great? What does he do? Well, he just something there. Yes, he trains, and yes, he learns how to box. He knows the fundamentals, but there's something. And Bill Morty just had it. They've never had anybody come along since like him.
Rick, do you have anything else to add about Bill Morty and his touch
on our
country?
Don, listen, I love Don's one of my dear friends, and not just in boxing, period. And I love listening to Don, and I think great minds think alike, and Don's got an unbelievably great mind, and I can echo those same thoughts overall. I mean, he knows more about the history of boxing. We both know about the business of boxing. The history, Don's way superior to me. Nobody calls me up and asks me about fighters that are dead.
Yes, Mike.
They do, Don. Right? Yeah, and it's just what he's saying is true. I mean, there's no question about it. Bill Morty was a great promoter. There's no question about it, and he did a lot he was an innovator, and he was remember, he came from a TV background. He worked for Fox.
Well,
so
that's what he primarily did. Yeah, a sports writer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all right. Don, so we see ourselves.
Yeah,
you've come from.
Back.
That's all right. That's all right. You come from a time where you've seen TV come in, radio get more involved in the sport, and so on. Now, you've also seen the emergence of social media. How has social media impacted the sport differently to what you've seen all over these years?
Well, I'll tell you, Rick would be your expert on this, but of course, that's an outlet that didn't even exist. So I feel like if somebody was born 50 years before me, they would have been born in an era where there was basically no radio, and there was no television for sure, and they had to come, and it was sort of like an opening of like discovering an entirely new planet. And for myself, it's the same. I went out, the Ring magazine's been bought by Turk Ali Sheikh, and he's put a lot of money into it, revived it. And I went out the last 2 days. I said, let me go get this Ring magazine just to see how it looks in the new production. There isn't a place, and we used to have the 7-Elevens and the local pharmacies and, these other places that doubled as, they'd sell you chewing gum or sodas and things where you'd go in and buy that, and they'd have magazines there. No place could I find, forget about the Ring magazine, virtually any magazine. So I don't know, people stop reading. Everybody gets on their phone, they get onto the internet. So that's a fabulous way to get exposure. The only problem I see with the internet is that if you're a boxing fan, you're going to go to Fight News or Boxing Scene or the Ring Now or whatever one. And the same people that go in to see one of those websites are going to see all of them. Maybe it's a little overflow for a fight that Australians might go more often to a website that features an Australian fight, or a Puerto Rican in New York would pick up the viewership. It's a Puerto Rican, just to read about them, not just broadcast them. When you're in the generic newspaper, as George Parnassus said, everybody reads the newspaper. Everybody reads the sports because you're going through the weather, you're going through the news, you're going through the sports. It's there in front of you, whether you want to read it or not. So you're piecing through it. Pique the attention of somebody who was not necessarily interested in boxing. So it's a phenomenon what it's done. There's absolutely nothing comparable to the internet. You have the world in your pocket. But it is basically on these websites anyway, preaching to the converted. Whereas the general newspaper would reach a wider audience because it's encompassing everything, not just sports, but everything else. And in the sports column, it's not just doing boxing. It's got rugby, it's got sailing, it's got football, whatever you want to follow. And accidentally, your eyes might go and veer towards boxing. But insofar as a phenomenon, it's, it's like the computer. It's changed the world. It's done more. Whatever television's done is more exponentially than TV, even.
Rick, what are your thoughts on social media and its impact on the sport?
Well, since the year 2000, 25% of my profits, approximately per year, come directly from social media.
How so?
That tells you all you need to know. But me contacting fighters contacting me from content that I put up, or from Facebook, from Twitter, lawyers on there saying, "Oh, would you like to be I listened to you. You really know your business. Would you like to be an expert witness in this boxing-related lawsuit?" I mean, just fighters call me, looking for work, just a little bit of everything. Me looking for sparring partners and opponents, everything. 25% of my business comes directly off of social media.
Business, why do we keep hearing in today's world that they're social media fighters, not real fighters?
That's not true. The top fighters are arguing on social media. They're not fighting each other, but I'm talking about guys that are solid journeymen that are like 30-5 and 23-4 and 23-5. I'm looking for action. So they are, but the top fighters are arguing with each other. That's correct. No question about it.
Well, the social media, it does give an out, like here. I mean, it's given a wonderful chance for yourself. You're a knowledgeable guy. You get an opportunity. But if you didn't have the podcast outlet, you'd have to fight to get on the ABC or Fox, where it's a limited. Like 30 people may have jobs in that industry, right? Where get on in terms of fight on a social media outlet like this. So if I put on a boxing match, 5 fights, 10 fighters, and I put it on YouTube, how am I making revenue out of this? I mean, they're getting some exposure, but how are you getting people to know that there's a fight? You advertise on these websites, and then
Don,
Don, your picture sideways.
You switched to sideways.
I'm sideways. Okay, now.
Yeah,
and my sound is gone.
No, that's all right. Just take us back to the way
better.
it was.
I don't know what's happened. It said here something's happening with my the sound. I don't know what's going on. Am I losing?
Sounds
have
fine.
I gone?
No, you're still
I
there.
can hardly hear you though. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah. If you can just turn the screen around, please. That's all.
Like this.
I don't know why. That's still doing the same thing.
Jesus.
1 second. Let me see.
Now I can see I look perfect on this, or not perfect. I'm seeing my face is the same as your guy. You are. It's vertical. It's not tilted to the side. You're telling me I'm tilted to the side?
No, you're sideways. You're sideways.
Yeah,
completely.
Sideways. So I'm horizontal on the screen. How is this happening? Now how's it?
Yeah.
Now I'm upside down. See, this is
you are.
social media, my friend. Now that's one of the drawbacks. Now
go back to how you were just before. Just that flick that way.
You know what? I'm gonna click off. I'll join you back again. Let me try to get myself back.
No worries. Rick, very common conversation, mate. We hear it all the time. How much social media has helped the sport, the distribution of sport, 100%. But there's always this term thrown around, and the reason why I'm asking, because this is a man who's seen TV come into the sport, radio being activated into the sport, the newspapers, the magazines. He's got 50 years under his belt. So the transition to this digital ecosystem or this digital world would have been different or completely foreign. So hence why that question coming up. We got you, man. Much better.
All right.
Yeah. So Don.
I don't see him at all.
Oh goodness.
I can see him. Yeah. So
you've seen enough of
Don,
me. That's all right.
Don, the reason why I ask you this question is because you've seen that transition from radio to TV to magazines and newspapers, and and that wider distribution and how hard it was, as you mentioned, there's a negative connotation that comes in today's world with social media fighters, blah, 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 blah. But really, it's done a lot of great for the sport. And hence why I wanted to sort of get your understanding and your thought process on that. I think we've unfortunately lost him again. Don? Yeah. See if we can bring him back in. He was doing very, very well. No.
There you go.
No,
I can see. Oh,
we'll see if we can bring him back in. But yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, it's definitely times, as he's mentioned, the sport lacks infrastructure and grassroots.
oh, there's no question about it. But it's always lacked infrastructure.
But they made it work. They made it work.
They made it work because the times were better, and we are a victim. We are a victim of our own stupidity in this business. We're putting on fights that the promoters want to see, that put on, not fights that the people want to see. That's big.
Absolutely.
That's big.
Because people will just simply tune out, and decisions that have been played with have been
Right.
huge.
Right.
Huge job.
I got a roll. We'll talk later. I got a conference call I got to go on, and we'll have Don back another night. Okay.
All right, Rick.
All
right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. We'll catch you all on the next episode of Raw Sport. Take care, everyone.